How do you get a $100 million market valuation for a company, virtually a shell company, mind you? I mean, it has one asset, and that asset is a money-losing asset, and its total annual revenue from selling sandwiches isn't even $20,000. How do you do that?
Like David Einhorn said, the pastrami must be amazing.
Either that or it's fraud.
Yeah, it could be fraud.
If you'd like to earn CPE credit for listening to this episode, visit earmarkcpe.com. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Continuing education has never been so easy. And now, on to the episode.
Hello and welcome to Oh My Fraud, a true crime podcast where our shells are the company kind and not the bullet kind. I'm Greg Kyte.
And I'm Caleb Newquist.
Hey Caleb, before we dive into today's podcast, let's indulge in a quick listener review.
Yes, let's indulge. This one is from CMags03. Quote, "What a great podcast. The humor alongside great reporting and storytelling is the best I've come across. Please keep up the great work. This is prescribed listening for me, and I genuinely enjoy the level of detail, especially around controls."
That's awesome. Thanks, CMags03. We will definitely keep up the great work, or at least the mediocre work, however you like to do it, and we will be your dancing poodles in the fraud podcast space for as long as we can.
A control lover. Very.
Yeah.
Didn't see that coming.
Control freak.
A control freak. There you go.
Yep.
Yeah. And our therapists, thank you for the positive affirmation for our experience. And we'd like to encourage anyone out there listening to leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you listen to or use, because we'll read them.
Yeah.
And it helps people find the show.
Exactly.
So,
it's so great. It's a free podcast. So if you feel guilty about that, leave us a review.
Leave us a review.
That's what we're after. Okay, so let's get into this, Caleb. To make a left turn here, real quick. Are you a foodie? Do you consider yourself to be a foodie?
No, I'm more of an eatie.
Okay,
I would say.
I'm
an eatie.
What do you mean by that?
I like eating.
Okay.
I mean, I just like eating. Yeah. I mean, I like lots of different kinds of food, and I like in the spectrum of, I guess, sophistication. Is that the word? I don't know.
Yeah, I think
let's just put it this way. I'm as comfortable in the outhouse as I am in the penthouse.
I get that. I totally get that, because sometimes I like to think of myself as a foodie, and then I realize that I'm not. I'm probably not really a foodie. I'm probably just a glutton with some disposable income. Is really what it is. But I'm with you.
You're like an eater. You're an eater who can like splurge once in a while.
Exactly.
Lot. Yeah.
Do you remember like the most expensive meal that you've ever had? Or at least a very expensive meal?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I do not go to steakhouses often, but when I do, it always feels like I'm spending lots of money.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, you know what? My wife and I went to sushi at a very fine sushi restaurant near where we live, and we did the omakase, which is a tasting menu. I hope I'm pronouncing that. My Japanese is non-existent, but I think that's how it's pronounced. But that's that's essentially like an 11 course thing. You can do it at a sushi restaurant. I've done it a couple of times. Once in Japantown in San Francisco, and then we did it once here. I did that with a friend, and I did another one here with my wife, and those are real fun. You get to try a lot of different things, a lot of weird things. But it's pricey. You pay for it because it's kind of extravagant and a lot of food. But that's super fun. So I highly recommend that for sushi people.
Sushi is one of those foods that you don't want to go cheap on either. Two things you don't go cheap on: tattoos and sushi. So good
advice. That's good life advice.
It really is. It might not be. No. I think it still is the reigning champion for the most expensive meal that I've ever had in my life. But I was invited to by Ron Baker to a Verisagen symposium in Napa, California. And part of this, like, it's not a conference. It was a little too intimate for a conference, but one of the events that they were doing was a meal in a wine cave, and it was $350 per person to go to this wine cave. And it's interesting that for both of us, when we talk about our most expensive meals, neither of us mentioned a sandwich that made our most expensive meal. Likely, I would say if we said our best meals, I've had some pretty fucking amazing sandwiches, but if I were to list my best meals I've had in my life, sandwiches wouldn't really make it on there. And what makes that interesting is that today we're going to be looking at a deli, a place that sold cheesesteaks and Italian subs, and that deli was somehow valued at over $100 million. So there's this little town of less than 7,000 people. It's called Paulsboro, New Jersey. It's directly across the Delaware River from Philadelphia. And in Paulsboro, there's just one high school in the town, and the principal of Paulsboro High School, his name's Paul Marina. He was a wrestling legend. He himself, he won 2 NCAA Eastern Regional Wrestling Championships when he was a student at James Madison University, which is in Harrisburg, Virginia. And as the head wrestling coach in Paulsboro, he earned 25 state championships with his team in 27 years. The dude was legendary because there's like big time wrestling. This is like small time wrestling, but he was a big fucking deal
right. There's no championship belts, I believe.
Not for high school. You didn't wrestle, did you? Was that a sport that you picked up?
No, I was a bit too lanky, probably.
I wrestled in 7th and 8th grade in middle school.
Sure.
And then I didn't in high school, and I'm glad because it seemed like in high school, that's when those guys, the wrestlers just got weird and intense during.
Well, it's all that not eating.
All the spitting in a can to try to make weight. That was, there's something
that'll make you a little nuts.
Not healthy about that. But so speaking of Paul Marina, this wrestling legend, he was he was the principal of the school. He was the wrestling coach of the school. But in public education, side hustles are a way of life, and I know that from experience because, I was in a past life, I was a middle school math teacher, and every summer there was something that I had to do. So in 2014, Paul Marina, the principal and coach, he started Your Hometown Deli. It was a nice little modest deli right across the street from Paulsboro High School, where he was, giving kids detention and making them do burpees. And I kind of feel, and none of the research did I get into this detail, but I figure his motivation for starting this deli was, one, he could make a little scratch on the side. And you got to think, if you're the wrestling coach and you open a food place right across from your high school, that A, wrestlers are going to be your clientele, and B, wrestlers are going to be your staff. So he was probably thinking, I'm going to hire a couple of my wrestling guys and help them make enough money so they can afford their singlets and their ear guards and their wrestling shoes. So what happens, though, after that is not too long after he opened this deli, he was approached by, of all people, one of his former wrestlers, this guy named James Patton. And James was talking to Paul Marina and saying, hey, what if we take Your Hometown Deli public? Make this single location, newly minted, just real basic sandwich shop. Let's take this thing and make it an SEC certified public company. Let's do this because let's shoot for the stars.
Why not?
And the connection, the funny thing, the connection between James Patton and Paul Marina is James Patton was actually one of Paul Marina's wrestlers at Paulsboro High School back in the 1970s. But like I said, we're talking 2014 now. These guys are both older fellas. And what Patton was doing at this point is he was a financial analyst for a company called Tyron Capital. And also, fun fact about James Patton is he had already been barred by regulators from acting as a stockbroker and had been not once, but repeatedly disciplined for things like allegedly manipulating stock prices and things of that nature. So yeah, this is the guy who came to very salt of the earth Paul Marina and said, hey, let's make this deli a public company.
And that's exactly what happened. Your Hometown Deli was acquired as a wholly owned subsidiary of Hometown International Incorporated in mid-2014. And in mid-2015, Hometown International went public with just one small deli as its only asset and its only business. The deli founder / wrestling coach, Paul Marino, was made president, CEO, CFO, and treasurer of Hometown International and was awarded a shit ton of shares in the company.
Yeah.
About 1.5 million shares out of about 8 million shares outstanding, to be precise.
think that is, according to regulators, I think that does qualify technically as a shit ton.
Yeah, that's
of shares.
Ton. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So
anyway, and this deli went along being a boring, underperforming deli for 7+ years. And apparently Hometown Deli made a good cheesesteak, a good Italian sub.
Okay.
I love a good Italian sub.
I
also like an
good
Italian beef,
steak.
To be honest. I love an Italian beef.
Do you?
Myself. Mm-hmm.
Hey,
big fan.
I'm saying as long as you put enough meat on that Italian sub, I'm going to be a happy guy. Don't skimp on my cold cuts is what I'm saying.
As far as business is concerned, Hometown had its best year in 2016 when it earned a whopping $76,213 in revenue.
Wait,
not profit.
Profit. Not profit.
Revenue.
76,000, not 76 million, not 760, $76,000 in revenue.
Yeah. Okay. The top one.
Yeah.
The top one. They made as much money. The deli made as much money as, a second year associate a second year associate at PwC in Jersey City.
Yeah. And
or
it's
in
funny.
Philly, since Philly's a little closer, we'll say a PwC associate in Philadelphia.
I would think that Paul Marino was probably making about $76,000 combined between coaching wrestling and being a principal of a high school. That was probably about the same as his take home from both of those gigs. Yeah.
Now, its worst year was in 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic began, and its revenue that year was only $13,976.
Yeah. Barely, not even hitting 14K for that year. And I think from the research I did, it was actually closed for about half of that. Like they just did not allow restaurants to operate in New Jersey for about 6 months. So that it makes sense, but still not a real thriving business, even when there's not a global pandemic.
Even by deli standards.
Yeah. I know Subways are raking in a whole lot more than that.
Those Jimmy John's probably, those are tightly run ships.
Exactly.
All right. So Hometown never turned a profit. In fact, every year it posted huge losses. Why? A lot of it was because revenue was not good. But the biggest factor is because it was a public company. It cost a lot.
Right. Yeah.
To keep a pump. It costs a lot to become a public company.
Yeah.
But then it costs a lot also to stay a public company.
Exactly.
Okay?
Which is why this is so weird that it's like, hey, not only is this a brand new deli, but it's untested, and also you got to go. Delis aren't really they're not gonna go to the moon. Is like best case scenario over a decade or two, you will start franchising and end up making. But it's not gonna be. It's not a rocket ship. You're not jumping on the next flight to Mars.
No, I mean, let's be honest here. We're talking about meat and cheese and bread.
Yeah.
And some decent pickles. And you got a business.
Yep.
But it's not a big business.
Yeah. It's not huge profits. Nobody's spending $350 a head for your cheesesteak.
Right. So to give it some context, The average amount that an SEC registrant pays for an audit, and to pay for an audit, right? Because they have to have them.
Yeah.
In 2016 was over $1.9 million.
That's the average price.
Average.
Yeah.
And that went up to over 2.1 million in 2020. Hometown's audit costs were about 20,000 in 2019 and 2020, which wiped out all of their revenue for both of those years.
Right. Yeah, because 2020 the revenue was not even 14,000, and I remember looking at the 2019, and the 2 years combined, and they said this over and over again in the different articles about this case, is that in those 2 years they didn't even make $40,000. So literally all of their revenue for those 2 years was just taken out in just the audits.
Yeah, and they have to buy things other than an audit, right?
Right.
They have to have bread.
Yeah.
And they have to have pepperoncinis.
Yes. and probably
mayonnaise.
the little paper cups for the Diet Pepsi.
Right.
Yeah, because wrestlers they're not drinking the sugar sodas. They're drinking the diet.
And if you're having wrestlers, they probably want the mustard because they're watching the calories.
They do. And they're probably wasting napkins. So yeah, they were tanking on their and actually the financials that I looked at, it was the 2020 financials, so it had to look back to 2019 as well. And in 2020 they lost over $600,000 according to their income statement, and in 2019, the year before, they lost about $150,000 on their P&L. So just in those 2 years, this shop, who's again, to keep it in perspective, the best year was like $76,000.
Yeah.
And in 2020, they lost not 10 times that, but pretty damn close to 10 times that in a year. So they're not doing great.
Not doing great. They're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. Revenue is going down, not up.
Right.
Which is
wrong direction.
Usually the opposite of what you want.
That's what you want.
There's no sign of them trying to expand because how could you?
Right.
And yet the principals and shareholders continue to throw money down the Hometown Deli toilet because that's good business.
And then comes April 15th, 2021. And we all know on April 15th, everybody should be distracted with tax day. And in 2021, everyone should have been distracted by Lil Nas X's hit song, Call Me By Your Name. As you remember that song from April 2021, right, Caleb?
Yep.
And instead of those two things, the media gets all sorts of crazy about, guess who? Hometown Deli.
Oh.
And the reason why Hometown Deli, this sleepy little delicatessen in Paulsboro, New Jersey, the reason why that became the big story of the day is because on that day, hedge fund billionaire David Einhorn dropped his newsletter, and in his newsletter, he pointed out the weirdness that was Hometown Deli International, as you remember, the parent company of Hometown Deli. This is what David Einhorn says in his newsletter. He says, someone pointed us to Hometown International, which owns a single deli in rural New Jersey. The deli had $21,772 in sales in 2019 and only $13,976 in 2020. Hometown International reached a market cap of $113 million on February 8th, 2021. The pastrami must be amazing. Regulators who are supposed to be protecting investors appear to neither be present nor curious. A scathing indictment of regulators and a pointed concern of just because, Caleb, this was back around when there was the whole Robin Hood and GameStop weirdness, the meme stocks.
Sure.
And so this was after that. And this is kind of what he was pointing out. He's like going, what the hell is going on with our capital markets? Because they're doing weird things like valuing a deli at $113 million. And
a single deli.
And I asked you to look at some other companies that had similar market capitalizations.
Yes.
And the one that you brought up that I thought was the best example was Bed Bath & Beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Bed Bath, do you have a Bed Bath, just out of curiosity?
Yes.
Is there a Bed Bath & Beyond in your community? Can you drive to one from your house?
I mean, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, of course I can drive to one.
Yeah.
But I mean, the closest one is, it's a few miles. I would say like 10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. You're not walking there, but if you
definitely not walking.
If you need, if you need some household gadgets, or if you, or more likely, if you're going to someone's wedding and they registered there, you can get there to buy them something from their registry.
I certainly can.
And it's same with me. There's one, it's not 10 miles away. It's maybe, 2 or 3 miles away. So it's, and that's the point. Everybody's got a Bed Bath & Beyond that's near them. Here's another, I did a little research. Quick, just try to guess, how many locations do you think Bed Bath & Beyond has?
Well, I know they've been falling on hard times lately.
They have been. That's true.
So I think the number is dwindling.
Yeah. Is it more than one? That's really what I'm getting at, Caleb.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I do believe there's more than one.
I think we just stated that there's at least two. There's one near Denver, Colorado, and there's one near Orem, Utah.
Yes.
So there's more than one. And what I saw was earlier this year there were 691 Bed Bath & Beyond locations. Mm-hmm. And if you look at their annual revenue per location, they're actually pulling in around $9 million in revenue per location every year.
Oh.
But as you said, they aren't in the best shape, but their market capitalization with 691 locations, $9 million in revenue each store, they have a $55 million market capitalization for Bed Bath & Beyond. I can't think
that's pretty small.
That's like half. That's half of what Hometown International's market cap was.
Yeah,
which is bizarre. And even if you made the case that their market capitalization should be low because they're on hard times, they're at least like making a decent amount. Like the dollars per store alone is like, if anything, you gotta wonder if Bed Bath & Beyond is undervalued at $55 million.
Hold on. This is Caleb from the future jumping in. I can hear some of your brains breaking. You're thinking, wait, Greg, Bed Bath & Beyond went bankrupt. And you're absolutely right. While my good friend Greg was trying to make a point about the potential value of Bed Bath & Beyond, reality had other plans. On April 23rd, 2023, Bed Bath & Beyond filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. All of their stores, as well as all the locations of its subsidiary, Bye Bye Baby, will be closed by June 30th, 2023. Okay? All right. Back to the episode. So, Greg, since we've mentioned it a few times, I think it's worthwhile to explain to the audience, for those that don't know, what market capitalization is.
Yeah.
And how it kind of... Because like you pointed out earlier, there's 691 Bed Bath & Beyond stores, and they all have revenue of $9 million.
Right.
So let's make it easy and round it up to 10 million. That means that shouldn't this company, it makes
billions
almost $700 million.
Yeah. Is that right?
So,
yeah.
So shouldn't that make it worth more than 55 million? That doesn't make any sense, right?
Right.
So market capitalization, keep me honest here because I've been known to make mistakes, but market capitalization is the number of outstanding common shares for a company.
Yes.
For a public company.
Yes.
Multiplied by its current stock price.
Yes. By its most recent stock price. Yeah.
Like close of business, right?
That's it.
Okay. And of course, because stocks are traded throughout the day, the market cap will fluctuate throughout the day.
Right.
But at the end of day, you can say, and since it changes, every day, it's very fluid. But
it's a moving
target. As of this recording, the number of Bed Bath & Beyond shares times its market price equaled $55 million.
There you go. That's exactly right. And that is accurate. And that's really what, for laymen like us who aren't, we're not professors of finance. So that's
certainly not.
That's really a good enough example. But our friend of the show, Matt Levine, he actually
full
said
disclosure, he's not really a friend of the show, but
he's a friend of the show now.
Is he? Oh, great.
I think so.
Okay,
he's a friend
sure.
He made
he's
a case.
A very good writer.
He is, and he made a case that all of it's not just all the outstanding shares, but it would be the fully like if everyone's options and warrants and things like that were executed, then you have to include that in the number of shares that you multiply by the most recent sales price. So, which is very interesting because when he did that calculation, he says Hometown Deli was worth more like $2 billion if you look at it like that. But everybody was saying 100 million because like the calculation that you said, that's really more the quick and dirty, and I'd say arguably more accurate calculation as well. So yeah, a little, because again, if all of a sudden the market was diluted by 20 times or something like that, if all the possible shares were out there, that would, I'm sure, based on the laws of supply and demand, that would drop your share price pretty quick.
Yes. Yeah, like a rock.
Yeah, exactly. So
okay, that was fun.
That was super enjoyable.
So you'd think that the media attention that Einhorn brought to Hometown would burst its bubble. The stock price would tank.
Yeah.
And everything would go back to normal. Right?
Yeah.
No. The day after Einhorn's letter, people were buying a shit ton of Hometown stock. The average daily trading before his letter was about 350 shares per day. Actually, here exactly 353 if Greg Kyte's research is to be believed. And
it's my research is dead on with that one.
Impeccable. So the day after David Einhorn's newsletter, over 42,000 shares traded.
Which is crazy, but also wonderful.
And the day after that was just under 15,000.
Right. And so some of the explanations.
Can I just stop you?
Yeah.
You were a middle grade math teacher.
Yeah.
Middle school math teacher.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that meets the definition of exponential growth, right?
Oh yeah, that definitely would. Yeah, it definitely would. Not well, and it's just bizarre growth is what it is.
Yeah. Right.
And even that, like, people were trying to wrap their brains about why in the hell that happened, but it was. But again, remember, this is right on the heels of the whole GameStop thing. Right. So as weird as it is, a lot of the explanation for why it blew up was that there was just people who thought it'd be cool and funny to buy a couple of shares of this,
shares in that deli.
Yeah. And so if you've got enough people like, I'm going to just throw, because they were trading it like, what was the share price for these guys?
So what's also weird, because this is a pretty weird story. What's also weird is despite the huge uptick in trading volume, the price of the shares actually went down a little bit. Yeah. Which, like you mentioned it earlier, kind of seems to violate the law of supply and demand. Yeah. The pre-Einhorn price was $13.50 per share, 2 days, and 57,000 trades later, the price was $12.99, about a 4% dip. But Hometown was still a $100 million company.
Yeah. And that's the thing. So if each share, if we're just talking, $13 a share, I could see people who were just market enthusiasts going, "Hey, I'll throw $130 at that and buy 10 shares.
10 shares.
Just to say I did it."
Yeah, got some Hometown Deli in your portfolio.
And there might have even been, well, I don't know. I don't believe this, that because people get excited about a hot stock that's higher than it's supposed to be because they assume it's going to keep going higher, which is the complete opposite of what they should think. So there was some chitter chatter about how that might have been part of it, but whoever's buying because they think it's a hot stock, even though it's only on anybody's radar because David Einhorn said it's a bullshit stock. is just an idiot and deserves to lose all the money that they put into it. So it's maybe the whole idea that no press is bad press is what that tries to, drive home. So with all this happening, everybody just wanted to know what the hell is going on with this goddamn company. and the first one of the things that you need to know is that Hometown stock is called an over-the-counter or an OTC stock, which basically means, and again, this is dumbed down for me because I'm not the brightest guy, but it basically means it's a publicly traded stock, but it's not listed on an exchange. That's your understanding of OTC, right?
Yes.
Right, Caleb? Yeah.
Yep.
And so it's not, so basically you have private listings and private buying. It's not, it's not New York Stock Exchange. It's not NASDAQ. It's just people who have them for sale and other people who are like, I'll buy some of that. Second thing you need to know is that the vast majority of all of the stock that was out for Hometown International was owned by a small group of people. And the third thing you need to remember is what we just said about how market cap is calculated. It's just the last sale price by the total number of outstanding shares. Mm-hmm. So if you take all that together and you're a thoughtful person, it'll come to mind pretty quickly that there's a huge risk of market manipulation with these over-the-counter stocks.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. It's
why would you conclude that there's market manipulation?
Well, I would conclude there's market manipulation because everybody's going, why the hell is this one deli company worth $100 million? That's why I would conclude that.
On paper, that looks very strange.
It looks very strange. But then it also makes sense with these OTC stocks that it'd be easy to get there because let's take this example. Let's say that you have two institutional investors who both own shares of an over-the-counter stock.
And just to make sure everyone understands, by an institutional investor, you mean like somebody big, like a mutual fund or like a state pension fund or something like that.
Well, I'm even talking more pedestrian than that, where it's more like there's just a company whose sole purpose is to invest in stocks.
You like just a hedge fund.
It's like a company a hedge fund would be an example of that, but you could just have somebody who set up an LLC that's just like they're trading and
so
market speculation LLC.
Okay, got it.
But the things you said, like a pension company or a hedge fund, that would also be an institutional investor. But let's make it a little bit more, like I said, pedestrian than that. Let's just say it's a couple LLCs that were set up just to do speculation in stocks. Okay. And so they're two separate entities, but let's say those two separate entities have the same person who is in charge of the operations of those two different entities. Very easy to do. And if those two entities both own shares in the same OTC stock, they can sell the stock back and forth to each other for whatever price they want to sell the stock for. And then all of a sudden, if that's the last price that was given for a share of the stock, then that all of a sudden is the lever for your market capitalization. So if you want to double the market cap for that company, you just sell from one of your companies to the other company twice of what it last sold for. You could sell one share for that, and that would double your market capitalization. Now, people are usually going to be a little bit more like sneaky about it. maybe slowly build it up rather than say, here, I'm going to buy one share for $1 million. And now it's a, bazillion-dollar market cap company. But also, weirdly enough, that's what some people have done with some cryptocurrencies that they've just made and thought it'd be funny to say it's worth, $4 quadrillion. So they do the hocus pocus, and all of a sudden they can say that a cryptocurrency is worth $1 gazillion, even though no one owns it except one guy and his brother. Yeah. So Caleb, talking about these two fictional institutional investors with the same guy who's able to call the shots at both those companies. Bottom line, that's actually what was happening with Hometown. There was that exact kind of thing going on. Now, in case you didn't know, market manipulation is totally illegal. But what makes Hometown even weirder is that typically market manipulation is part of a pump and dump scheme where you pump up the price, then you get the word out about how hot this stock is, and Hometown's share price was up 939%. And then after you go, hey, this thing's going to the moon, it's already up 939%. Get on this train before it leaves the station. And then everybody clamors to get your shares. You sell all of it to all these super stoke investors, and you make lots of money. And then you don't really give a shit after that what happens to the stock, because you just rang the cash register and got your money and got the hell out of Dodge. However, in the case of Hometown, there was all the pumping, but none of the dumping. And in fact, it's weird. One of the many weird things about this Hometown case is that there was zero attempt to even publicize the stock or the price of the stock or the growth of the price of the stock.
The other thing that people speculated was going on with Hometown is that its entire reason for existing was to become a vehicle for a reverse merger. Back in episode 7, when we interviewed Francie McKenna, we talked about SPACs. Those are special purpose acquisition companies.
I remember this because I remember you and her talking about SPACs and me interjecting and said, hey, what's a SPAC? SPAC?
She was very gracious with you, Greg.
So gracious. She should have just left the podcast, but she instead explained to me what they are.
Yeah. And a reverse merger is a shadier version of a SPAC, and SPACs aren't exactly squeaky clean, but
right. That's like saying filters cigarettes are a healthier version of a cigarette.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. In both cases, there's a shell company that's a public company. Okay.
Yeah.
Some other company comes along that wants to be a public company, but it wants to do it fast or cheap or both, and without too much scrutiny, okay? So the second company acquires the shares of the shell company, and then that shell company buys the company that wants to be public, and boom, the not public company is suddenly a public company. Cool?
Yeah, that makes sense, because it's basically you're going to do a hostile takeover of the shell company, and then once you're in control of the shell company that doesn't really have anything, you say, I know what we're going to do. We're going to acquire that company over there, which is really the company that we are already in. And then you do a merger, and then all of a sudden your private company is a public company. Makes sense to me.
Cool. Now, SPACs at least have certain safeguards, procedures, rules that must be followed. Reverse mergers, on the other hand, do not. Reverse mergers are not explicitly illegal, but they should be seen as kind of a red flag.
Yeah.
It's like if your Tinder date rolls up in a nice car and then takes you to an expensive dinner, but then during that dinner, you find out he lives with his mom. That's kind of like, that's more or less it. It doesn't mean that he's a loser or a serial killer, but if and when he does turn out to be a loser or a serial killer, everybody, including you, will say that they always knew it.
Right. It was obvious.
Yeah, it was obvious.
It was obvious. We knew it the whole time.
Knew it the whole time.
And just quickly to note, our explanations of reverse mergers and SPACs are very superficial. There's a lot more to learn about it. We put a link in the show notes, so if you want to get a better understanding of reverse mergers and SPACs, just check out the show notes and research to your heart's content. So, in his April 2021 newsletter, David Einhorn said, quote, regulators who were supposed to be protecting investors appeared to be neither present nor curious.
I remember from earlier in the show.
Yes.
When you read that.
And it turns out that one of the best ways to make regulators both present and curious is to very loudly, very publicly, and very specifically accuse them of not being present and curious. And boom, all of a sudden they just show up out of nowhere. And this media frenzy that David Einhorn sparked pretty much forced the SEC to look pretty closely into what was going on at Hometown International. As it turns out, there's 3 people who are key players in this whole situation. The first one is James Patton. We talked about him before. He's the former Paulsboro High School wrestler. The second guy was Peter Coker Sr., and the third guy was Peter Coker Jr. All 3 of these guys were associated through James Patton's employer, Tryon Capital. And
Wait, didn't you say Tyron earlier?
Early in the podcast?
Yeah.
No, I said Tryon.
Tryon, like try on a pair of pants?
Yeah. Like,
are you sure?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you said Tyron.
Like, no. Go back and listen to it again. You'll see. It was Tryon the whole time.
All right.
Like, try on a hearing aid so you can hear what I said when I said it. Anyways, these 3 guys, Patton, Coker, and Coker, transferred millions of Hometown International shares to these nominee entities, which basically, like we were talking about before, it was companies that were just there to speculate in stock exchanges, and they transferred all these millions of shares to mask their control over the shares so that they could then indulge themselves in the pumping of the value of the stock. But they went beyond that too. They also transferred shares to family, to friends, and to associates. And then after transferring those shares, these 3 guys gained control over those people's trading accounts by obtaining their login information. So they still basically had control over all those shares that they transferred, but that also continued to obfuscate the fact that they did in fact control those shares. And then they engaged in wash sales and the pumping of the stock price, as we mentioned before.
Now, we should say at some point, right, that these are allegations. As of this recording, these are only allegations.
It is. These are alleged. Nobody's been sent to jail yet, but this is what things appear to be to the powers that be.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
But like we said before, there was just the inflation of the stock price, but not the dumping of the stock onto the unsuspecting masses, because it's also, and this is the thing, and we'll get to this even later. It's still super confusing what the hell these guys were really trying to do, but it seems as though their ultimate intention was, rather than dump the shares, to execute a reverse merger. Because apparently, if you're doing a reverse merger with $100 million company, it's way cooler or it feels more legit to the company that's trying to do this not so legit thing to do a reverse merger with $100 million company and not with a $50,000 company. So that's part of the at least as people are trying to decode what happened and try to back into some meaning of this. That's pretty much what they're figuring these guys were trying to do, is to execute one of these reverse merger. And the other thing is, there was also an intercepted text message sent by Peter Coker Jr. that said that once the reverse merger was announced, that the price of Hometown stock should get another upward bump, and then at that point they could sell the shares for even more of a profit. That's what he said, but we don't really see
the dump in the pump and dump.
Perhaps, that would be the dump, but that's the thing.
Yep.
But the dump never happened.
Right.
Nobody ever took a dump, and that's what. And so we got these 3 guys. And they actually never, any of them, made money on Hometown stock sales or on the reverse merger. They didn't. If you just look at what they had, they didn't make any. And there was actually a reverse merger that did happen. It happened on April 1st, 2022, with a company called Macamer Holdings Incorporated, which was a startup company, and as a startup it had 0 revenue, which, if you're keeping track, 0 revenue is less than the deli.
Yes,
not a lot less, but it's still less than the deli. the only way that there was any money made by these three knuckleheads was in consulting fees. So Hometown International paid the Cokers a little over $500,000 in consulting fees. Apart from that, nobody made much money. And if you think about $500,000 over the course of 7 years, you're talking, $70,000-ish dollars per year. Not a huge haul for the Cokers, even at that. And what's awesome is that this whole Hometown situation got a lot and a ridiculous amount of attention, and then it just kind of died, and people are still unsure if it fizzled out because of all the attention and scrutiny that resulted from Einhorn's newsletter, or if it fizzled out just because Patton, Coker, and Coker were bad at doing crime.
Regardless of their ineptitude, Patton and the father-son Cokers have all been indicted. They were charged with securities fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and securities manipulation. The Securities and Exchange Commission also filed civil charges against them. James Patton and Peter Coker Sr. were both from North Carolina, but Peter Coker Jr. was living in Hong Kong when everything went down. Patton and Coker Sr. were arrested right away, but Coker Jr. disappeared. He turned up 3 months later when he was found and arrested in Phuket, Thailand, where he voluntarily agreed to be extradited to the U.S. And as of this recording, he's still in a Bangkok jail awaiting extradition. The wrestling coach, by the way, got off scot-free, and despite its great cheesesteaks and a colorful backstory, they closed the deli in June 2022. So, Greg, did we learn anything? I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure either.
I love this story.
I do too.
I love this story, but I'm not sure what I learned.
Listen, I've realized that I love all food-related fraud stories that we've done, food or beverage-related. I love this one. I love the fruitcake fraud. I love the Pappy Van Winkle bourbon fraud.
Yeah.
I love all of them. If you put food or booze in a fraud case, I'm in with both feet. And I also like it when the fraudsters are at least arguably incompetent. And I'll still say that I think these guys were incompetent at what they were doing, because all of the maneuvers that they were doing throughout this entire story, the Cokers and Patton, everything they were trying to do was clearly to make money on the price of these stocks. And as you said, as was stated earlier, the only money that was made was the $500,000 in consultation fees, which again, you look at that, you divide it 3 ways, you divide it over 7 years, it's like chump change really for anybody in finance. So it was kind of a nothing. They missed the mark. And again, I think they had something there where if you're going to go to jail, at least go to jail for doing. These guys are all in huge trouble, and they didn't even really do the fraud that they were going to do. And that makes my heart feel good. That
they fell far short of at least our expectations.
Right. It's like they were, you're in jail, and it's like, what are you in for? Fraud. How about you? Attempted fraud. And it just doesn't give you the cred in the yard. I'm assuming, I'm projecting, but I think that that's probably the case. But Caleb, here's in terms of learning, the place that my brain goes with this story, and of course this is because my whole world is the CPA accounting world. So my brain goes to the CPA firm that audited Hometown's books. And I looked into it. The firm is called Liggett & Webb. They're a CPA firm. They've got offices in New York and Florida. The Florida branch was the ones that audited Hometown's books. And a little backstory on Liggett & Webb is these guys were censured and fined by the PCAOB in August of 2020. So if you got your timeline right, that was before Einhorn's letter about Hometown, so their censure was not related to this engagement. But regardless, they were censored, which is interesting, but also maybe it's not, because Caleb, I don't know if you have the same impression, but it seems like every firm that audits public company gets censured and fined at some point by the PCAOB. It seems like it'd be hard to find a firm that hasn't been in trouble, that audits public companies that hasn't been in trouble.
I think you'd be hard pressed.
Yeah.
To find a firm with a spotless record
from the PCAOB.
Yes.
Yeah, because there's a naughty list that goes on forever with those guys. So maybe that was just good. It's making a lot out of a little, because it looks good that they got in trouble by a regulator when everybody's getting in trouble with the regulator.
Yeah.
But also, I think this isn't nothing, but one of their partners, James Liggett, who you've got to assume is one of the founding partners of this, was barred from being associated with any registered public accounting firm. But again, the discipline against him was not for the hometown situation. And despite his name being Liggett, it's also still unclear if he was part of the Hometown International Engagement. So all this to say, and we see this with everybody, like I talked about with Patton, he had, he was barred from being a stockbroker. The company that's doing their books is being censured and fined, and one of their founding partners was disciplined by, I assume, the state board of CPAs. Even if you look deeper, like the law firm that helped these guys go public initially, they got in trouble for some other IPO shenanigans that they were involved in. So there's just this web of people with checkered backgrounds being involved with Hometown. But all that being said, here's my dilemma, and the dilemma is this: did Liggett and Webb, did they do something wrong? Because all of this feels like an Arthur Anderson kind of deja vu thing, where Liggett and Webb, because never in any of my research did anyone say that they did anything wrong, but also they were front row to what was happening, and they didn't do anything about it. Is that okay, or is that not okay? Like for instance, when you look at this case and you think about Liggett and Webb as a CPA firm, should they have even stayed on the engagement with Hometown, or should they have fired them as a client? What do you think about that?
I mean, we all know that, like, audit firms they're not known for taking stands against clients. So
yeah, well, and you're right. They're definitely not known for that, but I think that doesn't change the question, because the question is, should they have?
I mean, look, you have a public company that consists of a single deli with almost no revenue.
Yeah.
And it has a value, it has a market capitalization of $100 million. Like, there's any auditor can take a look at that on paper and be like, what's going on here?
This is fishy. This is
fishy.
This
doesn't make any sense.
It's red flags. It's just
weird.
Full of red flags.
And so, I don't know if they should have fired the client. I don't know if they should have rang up the SEC before David Einhorn made a spectacle of everyone. But, it's pretty weird. It's pretty weird when you just look at the circumstances and you understand what auditors have to do is they have to get an understanding of the business.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't look good.
Yeah. And I guess where my brain goes to is, like, should they have, I classify that as more of like, should I be giving more to charity? Like, and it's like, yeah, sure. I should. But probably. Am I obligated to? I'm not, but should I? Yeah. If in a perfect world, I'd be giving a lot more to charity than I am right now. And I'd say in a perfect world, I say, hell yeah. Liggett and Webb should have fired him. They should have called the SEC and said, hey, this is weird. Please look into these clients of mine because they're following the rules in terms of accounting procedures. But by seeing all this, there's something weird going on in this company. They should have done that. Now, I also can easily default back to being super rule follower kind of person and go, but did they follow all the rules? Did they have all the proper disclosures? And clearly they did, because like I said, there was zero implication in any of the research that Liggett and Webb didn't do a top-notch job with these financial statements.
Like the SEC filings were, I just remember reading in one of the Levine newsletters was like, the SEC filings were fine, clean.
Yeah.
Right. So
which is also part of the whole SPAC reverse merger racket, is that if your SEC filings of all that stuff isn't pristine, you're not a good candidate for a reverse merger or for a SPAC. Right. So you got to have those. So was the quality of the financials good? I think unquestionably so. But then that goes back to the whole Arthur Andersen thing, which I guess played out in a similar way, because Arthur Andersen, they went out of business, but not because they were disciplined by regulatory companies, but just because they got such bad reputation by being involved with Enron. So same kind of thing here, where these guys they got no slap on the wrist or anything like that, even though they were front row to some bad goings on. I guess that's kind of like if you're doing the taxes for the mafia, do you have to call the cops on them? Not if you want to keep your kneecaps, I guess.
No, not if you want to. Yeah.
The only
stay
thing
above ground.
The only thing to me, looking through the K1s the 10Ks for Hometown International, is I did notice that that Liggett and Webb did not include a going concern disclosure in their auditor's report. And to me, if you're losing $600,000 on a company whose revenue is $76,000, you should be putting a going concern disclosure in the auditor's report. That's the only thing that I saw that seemed to be missing from their financial statements.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. I mean, that would have probably maybe drawn a little more attention, but maybe not. Like, there's plenty of businesses that get going concern, that have going concern warnings. I mean, I don't mean plenty, but it does happen. And people are just like, all right. Like,
and I guess the only other thing I learned on this one is that it's weird how so blatantly obvious of some sort of weirdness and shenanigans, where it's just right in your face. And in our capital markets, people, if it's not hurting anybody, nobody's going to do anything about it. Right. Because again, I think if Einhorn didn't blow the whistle on these guys through his newsletter, it would have been very interesting to see what happened with them, and likely they would have executed. I assume. Tell me if you don't agree with me. I think they probably would have done the reverse merger, made the money the way that they thought they were going to, and would have gone on their merry way. What do you think? Yeah, what does your crystal ball tell you?
I don't know. Like I think one of the things I read was that because they were over the counter, that meant they couldn't be traded on Robinhood, for example.
Right.
So retail, very little exposure to retail investors.
Right.
So that was the case, like in the meme stock frenzy of this time period, which really wasn't that long ago. That was the big deal that people were like clutching their pearls about, was that retail investors were the ones that were going to get hurt. And they certainly did. Yeah. In this case, because it was a thinly traded stock, it wasn't eligible to be on Robinhood, for example. And so, like, who's the victim here?
Yeah.
It's like if you were going to make a defense, of these guys, and someone certainly is defending these guys.
Yeah.
It's like, who's the real victim here?
Right.
Is it a victimless crime? Or is this, that's the question.
Right. That's exactly. Well, and
it does. But to Einhorn's point, it's like, we have regulators that are kind of asleep at the wheel.
Exactly.
And we have financial engineering going on that is maybe not in the spirit of good finance,
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
And so it's the weirdness of it that caught people's attention. They're like, hey, maybe we should look into this. I'm like, oh, yeah, this is what's going on.
Well, and to even wrap it into the Francine McKenna episode one more time, this is the golden age of fraud, because
Indeed.
regulators are not present and not concerned.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode. Remember, if you order a pastrami sandwich, make sure that it costs less than $100 million.
And also remember, a reverse merger is a financial transaction, not a sexual position.
If you want to drop us a line, you send us an email at ohmyfraud@earmarkcpe.com. And Caleb, where can people find you out there in the internet?
On Twitter at CNewquist and LinkedIn /Caleb Newquist. Greg, are you on the internet?
I am. Okay. One thing you could do to find me is just Google Greg Kyte with the last name spelled properly, Kyte, and it'll show you all of me. And maybe a couple of things of like a firefighter in Georgia. But other than that, it's all me. I'm on Twitter at Greg Kyte and LinkedIn /Greg Kyte.
Oh My Fraud is written by Greg Kyte and myself. Our producer is Zach Frank. If you like the show, leave us a review, share it with a friend. That's how people find the podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you listen. And for the accountants out there, listen on Earmark. Get some CPE. It's a great deal.
It is.
There's no sandwiches involved, but
none.
CPE.
I'm already 25% of the way through my CPE for the next 2 years.
Oh, great.
Thanks to Earmark CPE.
Hey.
It's easy and enjoyable.
That's a fine endorsement.
It's so good.
Join us next time for more avarice, swindlers, and scams from stories that will make you say,
oh my fraud.